How's it going, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to do the ultimate Sony wide-angle shootout for their crop sensor cameras. So many of you may have seen some of the videos that I've done about the Rokinon 12mm lens. This is an incredibly sharp lens, and with a maximum aperture of f2, it is a force to be reckoned with when it comes to shooting in low light. Next up, we've got a favorite of many, which is the 10 to 18mm f4 optical Steadyshot. This is an incredible lens, autofocus, a great zoom range, and it's incredibly sharp as well. So with these factors pulling in its favor, this is going to be a tough lens to beat. And then last, one that's not been on this channel before, is this one here. This is Sony's 16mm f2.8 with the 12mm wide-angle adapter on it. This combines the autofocus of the 10 to 18 with the wide aperture, almost, of the Rokinon. At f2.8, this lens should hold its own very well against the other two. But I have done very little testing with this one, so it's going to be as much of a surprise to me as it is to you. So we're going to compare the autofocus of these lenses, the sharpness, comparing all three of them, taking the exact same pictures and what kind of sharpness you get, background separation regarding the aperture of the lens and the minimum focus distances, as well as astrophotography. We're going to take these out at night and see how each lens performs while shooting at the stars. We're also going to take into consideration the prices of each lens to see which one you guys should get. Now keep in mind this is for the ultra-wide lenses, so you can argue that the kit lens, the 16 to 50mm kit lens, is sharp enough and holds its own in this price range, but 16mm just won't cut it here. All these lenses are 12mm or wider, which really comes into play with astrophotography, getting a unique perspective on things, as well as landscape photography. So let's get started. Alright, now for the autofocus test. Sarge, calm down. Alright, so now for the autofocus test. Rokinon takes what seems like an eternity to autofocus, for good reason. It's manual focus. The 10 to 18 seems to be quick to focus. It doesn't hunt around a lot, but it is focusing on the very center of the image. It doesn't try and find anywhere else. If I tap to focus, it grabs focus quickly and confidently. There's not much wandering around done. So you know that it's got your shot in focus. As far as time from pressing the shutter to the image taken, this is currently focused out here. We're going to tap on the flower here, press the shutter completely down. It's almost instantaneous. Now for the 16 2.8 with the ultra-wide converter on it. I've noticed this lens does something kind of goofy, and it does it at both 16mm and at 12mm. Watch the rest of the picture while I'm holding down the focus button, and watch it kind of warp in and out of focus. That's not very confidence-inspiring when you're going to take a picture. However, it seems to get focused correctly, and it is almost as fast, maybe just a touch slower, than the 10 to 18. Let me open this wide open. So we're focused out there, bringing it in now. It's almost imperceptible. The autofocus on the A6500 is just so fast that there's not really any problem with autofocus while taking pictures. You're gonna get your shot and you're gonna get it in focus. That's one of the greatest things about this camera, is if you do your job, the camera will perform and get focus almost every single time. Alright, now video autofocus. This is the 16mm with the ultra-wide converter on it. It is struggling. There it goes. It is nice and smooth, if nothing else. So let's see how it works with the face in it. I'm not watching the screen, so I don't really know whether or not autofocus is working. But you shouldn't have to wonder if autofocus is working, it should just work. Another autofocus test, this time it is the 10-18. Seems to be pretty similar to the 16mm. Maybe a touch faster, but it is still slow and smooth when acquiring focus. Now for the 10-18. I'm not giving it much time to react, so we'll see. It should grab it pretty quickly though. The facial recognition on Sony cameras. There's a bird that just landed right there, and now it's gone. The facial recognition on Sony cameras is pretty good, so my face in it and then my face out of it should be enough to trigger the autofocus and get it in or out of focus. The Rokinon continues to disappoint. Alright, now this is going to be kind of the vlog test. This is going to be a bit of an autofocus test as well as a stability test in order to give you guys an idea of how the Steadyshot, whether it's in-body stabilization or optical Steadyshot, performs on a camera while I'm holding it on a tripod out in front of me. I've got it mounted on the Joby GorillaPod, and I'm just walking around holding it as steady as I can to give you guys an idea of how well this works. Now for some autofocus testing. Sorry. And now back to me. So, this is wide open at f2.8 on the 16mm lens with the ultra-wide converter. Also, as far as vlogs go, this here, I could pull this off, and now I've got a 16mm lens. This may not be as practical as just zooming in and out with the 10-18, but you can pop this thing off if you want to punch in or zoom in somewhere else. That autofocus was atrocious. That was a quick switch from the 16mm to the 12mm. So let's switch to the 10-18. Same vlog type test, this time with the 10-18mm. This lens has got optical Steadyshot built into the lens, so it might be a steadier shot. I'm going to walk the exact same as I was before with the other lens. Again, it's on a tripod being held out at about arm's length, as well as shooting wide open. This is at f4, the other one was at f2.8. Gives you an idea of the background separation and image quality you can expect from this lens. Now, as far as the autofocus goes, let's switch this around. Look over there. And now back to me. Does that work? Also with this lens, you can quickly zoom out or in. I think I got that right. In order to give a different feel to the videos that you're taking. So this is ultra wide Casey Neistat style. You could zoom in to talk real serious to the camera. Let's point it out here. Zoom in, zoom out. On me way up close, and now over there. On me again, now over there. So I think without a doubt the autofocus on the 10-18 is better than the 16mm with the ultra wide adapter. For some reason the autofocus is just a little fruity on that one. I'm not sure why. All right, let's check out some of the images that we're taking with these different lenses here. I've got them all laid out right here. Blue is the 10-18, as you can see up in the top left-hand corner. Red is the 16mm with the wide angle adapter, which that does not come through in the EXIF data. That's something good to know. And then the green is the 12mm Rokinon, which, since it's fully manual and not electronic at all, none of the exit data comes through into the images. We've got some astrophotography here at the beginning, but we're going to save that until the end. So let's just get started from left to right. This is the 10-18 millimeter, and as you can see, it's extremely sharp. I mean, there's no if and buts about it. This is just a very sharp lens. There might be a touch of motion blur because these leaves were kind of blowing around a little bit. And also this is a mint plant, in case you're wondering. It really got out of hand from last year. So you can see some of the motion blur there. But it's still a very sharp lens. And this is all the way up at f8. And you can see that there's details for days in the leaves. Going to the Rokinon, you can see we've got a lot more background separation compared to f4. It adds a very unique look to images. I haven't come across any other lenses that are this wide and have got this big of an aperture, so it adds a cool look to the images. This one doesn't seem as sharp, but as we stop it down, you can see that there's plenty of detail in these leaves, but this is definitely one of the sharpest lenses that I've ever used. Again, so that we're down at f5.6 right now, and then f8. And look at just how sharp that is. Let's go ahead and compare these two at f8, which we've already done in another video. We've got the 10-18 over here and the Rokinon on this side. For some reason, the 10-18 has got a much warmer look to it in pretty much all images, even in videos. So I don't know if there's some Sony trickery going on there or if it's just the glass, but these lenses are almost indistinguishable from one another, but I've always thought that the Rokinon is just a touch sharper. So let's go ahead and throw the 16 millimeter with the wide angle converter on it. We're going to go ahead and just compare it to the 10 millimeter. This is at f8 again, and as you can see, it's just not quite as sharp. It's definitely softer across the board, and this is pretty close to the center of the image, but I was really focused right here. As you move around, you can see that right here it's decently sharp, but it's not quite as sharp. And let's go ahead and step this all the way down to f2.8. We'll do the Rokinon on this side and the Sony over here. Real quick, just looking at the background looks a lot nicer in the Rokinon. This looks almost smeary. It's a distracting blur. And this is a nice smooth blur all the way back. So let's go ahead and zoom in on these two images here. And there's a little bit of a haze and general smeariness on the 16 millimeter with this wide angle adapter. And you can see that there's a huge difference in sharpness right here where it's really focused. Let's see if we can find any more in focus part on the Sony. It just doesn't hold a candle to the Rokinon. Let's step it up to f4 over here, and then we'll take this to the Sony. Here we go, f4 and f4, both of these are Sony lenses. So let's see how they stack up against one another. Again, we've got a little bit of a hazy look on the 16 millimeter over here. The 10-18 millimeter I found to be an incredibly sharp lens. I've heard some people compare it as an equal with the kit lens, which it's significantly better than anything I've seen come out of the kit lens. Meanwhile, the 12 millimeter adapter over here is probably closer to the kit lens than a lot of lenses I've tested. So moving right down the line. So this is the 16 millimeter with the wide angle adapter at f2.8. Let's jump from right here to the center. It's not super sharp, but as we move down through the apertures, you can see it gets sharper and brightens up a little bit. At f8, jumping up into the corner, it's kind of looking pretty smeary. It looks all right down on that side, and it gets a little smeary up towards the top too. We jump back to f2.8 and move over to the corners and the edges. I don't know what's going on over here, but that's pretty rough. Moving up to the top, there's like some streaking, some serious streaking going on. We can see chromatic aberrations coming through the fence there, but that's no big deal. Most lenses have got chromatic aberration in this kind of scenario. Again, smeariness, bad smeariness up in the corner with an interesting little starburst look. That's weird. So this lens with the adapter kind of falls short with image quality in several ways. So let's jump over to the 10 to 18 millimeter. This is at f4, jumping into the middle. You can see it's very sharp. In fact, I'd say it's so sharp that I'm not seeing any real improvement as it stopped down. That's in the center though. So let's go ahead and move over to the corners and the edges. We can see that the edges are already better than the 16 millimeter. All these are shot at 12 millimeters, by the way. There's it might get a touch better as we go up through the apertures here at the corner. We can see the background, the leaves, they're very sharp all the way out to the very corner. This is a very good image. Let's go ahead and compare these two. Look at the difference in the images there. The little clovers down here, it really falls apart in the corners, while the 10 to 18 is really holding it together. And this is at f8, so it stopped down. And the chromatic aberrations are all pretty much gone by the time we get to f8. Let's jump all the way back to f4. There's chromatic aberrations. It actually looks worse as far as the chromatic aberrations go in the 10 to 18, but that's a quick fix in Lightroom, and you can recover your photos pretty easily. Go to f5.6 now. Look at the corner in the background. That's just crazy. Moving over to the other corner, significantly sharper just across the board. Now for the Rokinon, this is f2, f2.8, f4, and f5.6. I must have missed something there, and there's no way to know what I missed. So that's a downfall of having a manual lens. If you really want to know what you shot it at, it's kind of tough. So I missed an image here somewhere, and I don't know what it is. But this lens here is incredibly sharp. It's incredibly sharp from f2.8 and down. At f2, it gets a little bit soft in the corners. It actually looks pretty rough there. But there is always chromatic aberration on this lens. There's no aperture that it goes away at. It's just always there. And as we step down to f4 or f5.6, you can see that it's very sharp now. And if we take it all the way to f, it's either 5.6 or f8, one of the two, you can see that it's incredibly sharp. The only thing that really takes away from it is the chromatic aberration there. So let's compare this back to the 10 to 18. We got the 10 to 18 over here and the 12 millimeter over here. If I had to guess, the 12 millimeters at f5.6, just because of the background being a little bit more out of focus. But you can see they're very comparable lenses as far as sharpness goes, and I've been amazed at how sharp the Rokinon is, and the 10 to 18 holds its own without a problem. Let's go ahead and throw the 16 millimeter in there. It's no contest. Eesh, this one looks rough. The only thing it's got really going for it is its lack of chromatic aberrations. All right, these are a couple of the images that I took while testing the autofocus. Just show you guys how well these turned out. This is the 10 to 18 at f4 and 12 millimeters. And this is wide open. This is a sharp lens when it's wide open, so that's always a plus. Well, here we have got the 16 millimeter with the wide angle adapter on it. This is also at f4, so it's the same aperture as the other one. And this is stopped down, and you can see that it is not as good of an image as what the 10 to 18 took. So we got the 10 to 18 on this side and the 16 millimeter on this side, and there's no question about the fact that the 10 to 18 takes a better image. The background looks smoother, the subject is sharper. Going off to the background over here, the bokeh looks nicer as opposed to this kind of squirrely sideways looking stuff. So this is at f2.8 versus f4. Both of these lenses are wide open right now, and it just gets worse for the 16 millimeter. And even though the bokeh looks worse, it's just the background just looks smeary. It doesn't look out of focus and pleasant, it's just smeary. A little bit of comparison with the barrel distortion and vignetting. This is the 10 to 18 going from f4 up to f8 here, and there's there's no different. The vignetting stays the exact same, which is not bad vignetting to begin with. Now we've got the 16mm. That's another win for the 10-18. It's got almost no vignetting at all. Now for the Rokinon, which has got very heavy vignetting, we can see that it gets brighter and brighter as we go down through the apertures here. I've noticed while shooting wide open with this Rokinon that the vignette almost adds to the image. So I typically like the images it produces. The Rokinon has pretty much got a tiny fisheye across the whole thing. The Rokinon starts low on the edges, gets high in the center, which is a standard fisheye barrel distortion. And the 16mm has got kind of a weird wave look to it. It starts high on the edges, goes down, and then gets high in the center again, which I don't know if I've noticed that before in any lenses, but it's not super bad. You probably won't notice it in any of your pictures unless you're doing very specific architectural photography. And the 10-18 is definitely the flattest of all of them, but it's got a similar distortion as the 16mm does, with starting high on the edges, dipping down, and coming high in the center again. But this one's definitely the straightest out of all of them. Now for the astrophotography. So this is how I did the astrophotography. I took a fixed shutter speed and a fixed ISO and shot these lenses wide open. When you're shooting the stars, you're pretty much shooting wide open all the time, no matter what. So this is an example of what kind of light gathering capabilities you can get out of these lenses. So this is the 10-18 at 10mm. I opened this one up all the way so you guys can see the kind of view that you get, because the wider you can get with astrophotography, the better off you are. Now this is the 16mm with the wide angle adapter. This is at f2.8 with the exact same exposure as the last image I just showed you. You can see that we're getting the same little starburst effect in the corners here, which that is not desirable. You almost notice that immediately when you look at this image. And now we have got the exact same exposure, ISO 2500, 25 seconds, and this is at f2 with the Rokinon. As you can see, it's much brighter than all the other images. Corners look pretty good, but there's a little bit of a little flare going on here, but it's not a deal breaker. Going back to the 10-18, looking at the corners here, there's a little bit of motion blur in the stars, but that's really the only distortion you get at the corners. There's a little bit of a star effect here at the very edge, but the corners look very good. I've been impressed by this lens, and I'm going to keep it. There's no question about it. So real quick, let's see what we can do with this as we bump up the contrast, lower the exposure. There's a lot of stars there, and you can actually see the colors and a lot of them there with this Rokinon. So this is definitely the lens to go for if you want to do astrophotography. And now I've got one more set of images. This is a 30-second exposure with the ISO at only 200, which is very low for astrophotography. And I'm just going to go through the images here. We've got the Rokinon, the 16mm with the wide angle adapter, and then the 10-18. As you can see, the 10-18 is really dark here because it's an f4. These other two lenses have got much wider apertures, which yields you much more light. So if your bread and butter is astrophotography, the Rokinon is what you want. Also check out this time lapse that I took with the 10-18mm and the Sony time-lapse app. Hopefully that breaks down every possible question you may have about these different lenses and how they perform and how they act, and the image quality you get, everything bundled up into one video for you guys to make a decision on what wide angle lens you should get for your Sony camera. So while there should have been enough information in this video for you to make a decision for you, let me give you my thoughts on these lenses. First of all, the Rokinon is so stinking cheap that if you're only taking pictures and you're not really interested in any video stuff, I would say this is the one you need to go with. It's extremely sharp, takes great images, has an insane close focus, has got an ultra wide aperture. There's just no contest with photography as to what lens you should pick. Learn how to manual focus. You should be selecting your aperture manually anyways, and go take some great images with this lens. The real question mark here is the 16mm 2.8 with the wide angle adapter on it. It didn't really take fantastic images. The autofocus didn't really work that well. It doesn't have in-body image stabilization built into it. Really the only thing it has going for it is its wide aperture and the fact that it does have autofocus. While the autofocus isn't great, it's a lot better than it is on the Rokinon. So you could get away with using this lens combination with videos, but I don't think that its image quality holds up well enough to be used as a photography only lens. So this lens combination here is probably for the person that wants to get into shooting some video along with their photography, wants two different focal lengths, and doesn't want to spend an absolute fortune. The 16mm 2.8 goes for about $250, and the wide angle adapter goes for about $150. So for around $400, you can have a decent setup with two different focal lengths. If you only were spending $200 on each lens, that's a deal. So you're effectively getting two lenses here with a fairly wide aperture, and I think that they'll perform pretty well for general day-to-day use. So the 10 to 18mm Sony here, I would say wins the best lens overall within this comparison. It had the best autofocus, it tied with the Rokinon on image quality, it had the best zoom range, it was the most versatile, and it seems to be the easiest to use. You don't have to take anything off and put adapters on, you don't have to manual focus, it's just the all-in-one package. But there's a bird landed right next to my foot. What's up with this video and birds? So with this lens being twice the price of this setup and nearly 3 times the price of the Rokinon, I would say that you only get this lens if you absolutely need it or you just want the best possible wide angle lens for the Sony system. So hopefully this incredibly detailed and lengthy video breaks down every possible question or scenario you might have had about these lenses and gives you guys the information that you need to make a decision on purchasing one of them. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the review of this 16mm f2.8 here. And if you liked this video, give it a like. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.